We have about 30 seconds.
Hey everybody, it's been a minute. Welcome back. My name's Sandra Roberts. I'm Director of Sales back at Odette, and I'm delighted to see you again. We started these virtual tastings together because of COVID, but I think we'll continue them after COVID, which is just around the corner. I'm delighted to be here with Mr. Aaron Miller, winemaker for Plum Jack, and we are going to taste with you the newest release from Plum Jack, the 18 Plum Jack Estate Cab. How's it taste, Aaron?
It's tasting great. I'm excited to get to it.
Well, you know what's important before you taste a great Cabernet is to get your whistle wet with some Chardonnay. We actually are here at Odette tasting with you today, not just because the mustard's so beautiful, but because actually the truth is our internet's better here. So we had some complaints last time about the birds were very loud. We decided to nip that in the bud so that you could hear us. Aaron, now I've talked to you about this Chardonnay before. It says plump, it says reserve, it says Napa, but there's no butter in here. What's up with that?
Well, we're going for a little different style here with our Chardonnay. The typical Napa Valley Chardonnay people often associate with that buttery character, big, bold flavors, ripe character, a lot of oak. And what we're doing is more in line with how we make the rest of our wines, I think. It's more focused on the fruit, on the Chardonnay grape, and on the vineyards that we're getting the fruit from. And so to do that, we do more stainless steel fermentations and less oak, because oftentimes that oak can mask the natural varietal character, that Chardonnay character. And that literally lets just the Chardonnay fruit shine through. And then on top of that, we don't do any malolactic fermentation. And that's a second fermentation, a bacterial fermentation that can give you that a lot of richness, a lot of creaminess in the palate, but can also give you that buttery character. And we don't want that buttery character. We're going for a nice, live, vibrant profile. Just more a little bit edgy, racy, and refreshing.
It's delicious. Do we grow it at Plum Jack Estate?
No, we get this from a couple different vineyards. We get the fruit from St. Helena, a vineyard just up valley, and we also get some from down south in Carneros. And the two different vineyards have a hugely different profile because of the places that they're grown. Carneros is much cooler than St. Helena, and you get more kind of zesty, citrus, a lot of racy acid, lively, really bright. Just beautiful wine. And then up in St. Helena, you get more tropical notes, more white peach, a little bit more palate weight, but a little less acid. And when you put the two together, you just get this really nice blend of volume on the palate, and great acid, and then that mix of aromatics and flavors too, that white peach and tropical notes, along with the zesty citrus characters as well.
That's one of my favorite wines. I think what's neat about the Napa Valley is we're pretty diverse. So those two vineyards working together make a beautiful wine. We are only 30 miles long, and the temperature difference from one side to the next can be, what, 15 degrees?
Yeah, 15, 20 degrees from St. Helena to Calistoga, no problem. And it can be even more up in Pope Valley.
It's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing. It really is one of the things that makes Napa so unique. And also one of the reasons why Plum Jack tastes different from Odette, which tastes different from Cade.
Yeah.
This diversity. So I think you did a pretty good job on this Chardonnay.
Thank you.
One of the things I love the most about Chardonnay, and actually all the wines you make, Aaron, is the texture. So this has just this kind of richness on the palate, but it's still light and bright. I always think about grilled scallop or black cod.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes well with foods that have some weight. You know, it has the acid that can cut through that weight, but it also has its own volume, its own weight that can stand up to it and support it. So yeah, it's a good pairing.
Well, he's known for Cabernet, really. But if you guys run across the Chardonnay, we don't make a whole lot. Try it. I think you'd be happy with your choice. But you know, 17 was a very short vintage for your Cabernet. 18, how did it come out? How was it good in volume and quality?
Yeah, it was good in both. You know, 17 was a lot shorter. We had a much smaller volume. 18, we had a lot of fruit. And oftentimes, when you get a lot of fruit, you can have kind of a diluted character, diluted quality. And that's definitely not the case in 2018. This is a really bold wine, a lot of depth, a lot of character, very complex, good tannin, good structure, a lot of weight and a lot of length too. It's one of my favorite wines that I've made so far, and it's got a lot going on.
But it smells like Konjac.
It does.
So we have all these components out on the table. What's all this doing on the table here? And why do we have blueberries and blackberries and raspberries and sage, coffee?
Well, we wanted to give you an idea of some of the different aromatics and flavors that you can find in this wine here. These are some of the different fruits and other elements that I've used to describe this wine. And you know, just to clarify, none of these are in the wine. The wine is made from just grapes and yeast, but these are different flavors that we pull out of the wine when we're smelling and tasting. There's a lot of fruit on the property, a lot of fruit character on the property, dark fruit, blue fruits, red fruits, so the blackberries, blueberries, and raspberries. There's this really beautiful fresh element that comes from these fresh herbs, and it comes off to me as more of a sage, maybe a little bit of mint. And then we also have a nice full component, some rose petal, and then also your barrels attribute flavors as well, aromatics and flavors. And from the barrels, you can get some coffee bean, some vanilla, and then in the middle is just a sample of our soil, and that's one of the most important parts of growing grapes and growing high quality grapes, and one of the biggest influences on the final character is your soil profile.
What makes Konjac so special?
Well, we were talking a little bit about the diversity of Napa Valley earlier with respect to the Chardonnay. We have 2 different vineyards in different parts of the valley, and that same thing comes into play at Konjac, but we're in a much smaller space. You know, we only have about 40 acres of land. And on those 40 acres, we have this incredible diversity of soils. When we're closer to the mountains, where we're here at Odette, you know, just as an example, we're in the same mountain range. Closer to these mountains here, we have much rockier, deeper soils. And as you start to move toward the center of the valley, toward the west, that rock starts to diminish. You get a little more sand, silt, clay. To the far west of our property, it's clay. And where you are on that piece of land really changes the character of the Cabernet Sauvignon. And we have different clones as well that also change the character. But I think that the biggest impact is the soil profile. So when you're further to the east, in those rockier soils, you probably get more of the blackberry, more of the blueberry, and some really dark fruit, really rich fruit. The fruit's a little riper. You also get a lot more, maybe some dried fruits, and the palate weight is bigger, more structured, more tannin, a lot more length. They're just bigger, more concentrated, more massive wines. And as they start to move to the west on the property, you lose some of the rock and you pick up a little bit more of the sand, silt, and clay. The soils, we call them a little heavier, they hold a little more water. And because of that, the vines themselves are much happier. The canopies are huge, they have a lot more vigor, they really want to grow. The grapes themselves might be a little bit bigger, the clusters could be a little bit bigger. And the fruit character changes. We get a little bit more of the raspberry, maybe a little bit of bean cherry. You get more of the sage and mint character, a little bit of that rose petal. And so you get this more elegant style of Cabernet from the west side of the vineyard. Less concentrated, not quite as tannic, but really beautiful acid. And this wine here is a blend of the entire property, so you get all of that in one bottle. You get the blackberry, blueberry, raspberry, sage, mint, some earthy character, just really, really beautiful wine. And it's that location that allows us that, that diversity in that specific location. It's very unique, and so we get a wine that I think differentiates us even from our closest neighbors.
For sure. When you think about Oakville in itself, Oakville is home to some of the best wineries in the world, and it's only 3 miles by 5 miles. Think about that, how tiny this little area is. And we are just 42 acres in that spot on the western side. And then in our 42 acres are 4 different soil types. When you get down to those brass tacks, it's mind-boggling how diverse this valley actually is.
Yeah, and when you can expand on that, you go to different parts of the valley, and not just our estate, but you have soil profile differences, but also differences of exposure. If you're in the East Mountains or the West Mountains, the Mayacamas or Vacas, or the valley floor. There's so many differences. You were saying earlier, north to south, we have huge temperature variations. So there really is there's so much diversity and variation within Napa Valley that there's a place for just about everything. All different varietals and different styles of those varietals. And that's one of the fun things that we have at Plumjack Kate and Odette, is that we can really highlight that. We can show the differences between Oakville, Stag's Leap District, and Howell Mountain. And it's kind of a unique position for us to be in.
Are y'all tasting this? I hope you're tasting this with us. And if not, grab yourself a bottle and go to the grocery. Because I think this is really neat, because as you talk about the flavors, and as I see them visually here, I can literally taste the blackberries and the raspberries and the sage. There's a little spicy element in there. Do you think that's from the barrels, or is that from the place?
Yeah, spice is more from the oak, and we use a lot of different barrels. I probably have about 50 different variations. Probably about 22 different coopers, barrel makers. And then within those, I have the different forests that the oak is from, and also different levels of toasting, the way they fire the barrels to toast the inside. You can do medium, medium plus, heavy, medium long. There's all sorts of different variations. And I taste each barrel, a few times a year, and really evaluate how the barrel is affecting the wine. And they all impart something different. A heavy toast barrel, for example, will give you some more of this coffee. But it's also going to give you a little bit more of a chalky kind of finish. The tannin is a little rougher. And medium plus might give you a little more of that spice, maybe a little vanilla, kind of that sweetness. But I find that they can often fill out the edges in the mid palate and give you a little bit more tannin than the heavy toast, but it's a finer tannin. It's a little bit more fine grain and not as chunky, on the palate. And so they can really influence the texture of the wine. And so we use the barrels for aromatics, for texture, for tannin. And so one of the things that we do as winemakers is find the right blend of barrels to elevate our wine and to really bring our wine to life and kind of make it what we think it should be.
We have a question from Facebook.
Yep. First question is, how have the last several years of tragic fires affected your Cabernet?
It's been difficult. 2017, we had large fires in the Napa Valley, and that was, at the time, we thought it was the most devastating thing that could possibly happen. We lost about half of our vintage. We had picked all of our white grapes, all of our Chardonnay, but we still had about half of our Cabernet Sauvignon on the vine, and so that was all damaged by the smoke, and we only made about half the vintage, for us about 3,000 cases of Cabernet Sauvignon. And we didn't make any Merlot, we didn't make any Syrah in that vintage. And then this past year, 2020, was even worse. We thought it couldn't get any worse in 2017. It can, and the fires happened much earlier. That happened before any of the red grapes were ripe. and so we didn't make any red wine in 2020. So that was devastating. All we can do is hope that we can rebound in 2021, and you know, just going to go forward and make the best wine we can next year.
I think that when you put that in perspective, that we did not make one drop of red wine in 2020 for any of our estates, it just shows our commitment to quality. We're not going to put our name on it if you're not worthy of it. We're just not going to do it. And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing we have is our word and our reputation, and our commitment to this place. You know, to lift this place to its highest potential. One of the biggest questions I get asked when I'm on the road is, where can I get more? Sandra, what do you mean you don't have more? Well, why can't we have more, Aaron?
Well, we would love to have more, but we can only take what Mother Nature gives us. In some years, like 2018 and 2019, which is still in barrel and we're still aging, those were bountiful years. So we had a lot for us. But we only have 40 acres of vineyards, so I can't make more than what that 40 acres produce. Even in a bountiful year, we're still limited by our acreage. But then there are other vintages, like 2015, where we had that same acreage and made half the volume that we made in 18 or 19, just because that's what Mother Nature gave us. We didn't have a very good set, which is when the flowers pollinate and turn into grapes. And so we didn't have as many grapes on the vine. We had a lot of clusters, but they were loose, scraggly clusters, not a lot of fruit. And so, you know, we made a very small amount of wine in 2015 as well. And so there's always these different things that we come up against, a lot of variation from year to year with volume. And as winemakers, we just make the best wine that we can. You know, we don't make any exceptions with respect to quality. And sometimes we can make, you know, a decent amount, and sometimes we can't make much at all. And then we have other years like 2017, 2020, where it's really out of our hands, and we have these fires or some other event like that, and we just can't make the win.
I think the most important part of that statement is to be a state cab, to be called Plumpjack Cab, you have to be grown on our property. So it's within that 40 acres that we own that the wine must be grown. And so if we started getting fruit from here or there or over there, it wouldn't be Plumpjack anymore. I mean, the whole idea of Plumpjack is it's a place, not just a label, not just a brand name, it's a place. So you can come and visit.
Right. Yeah.
Yes?
People are commenting that they've heard good things about the 2018 vintage. Would you compare it to other vintages, or what would you say specifically about it?
Well, I think that from a winemaking perspective, it's quite different from a lot of other vintages, any other vintages that I've worked. We've had a lot of drought seasons since I started here in 2012, and 2018 was kind of on the tail end. I mean, obviously we're back in drought status again, but we had a lot of rain in 17 and 19. But 2018 was this kind of strange cool year. You know, it was warmer in the beginning of the growing season, and then it just really cooled down in August and September. And that's a really critical time in the ripening process. And so we didn't have as much heat, and there's a little cloud cover, so we didn't have as much sun and UV, and it slowed down the ripening. And so it ended up being the latest season that I've ever been a part of.
Isn't that a good thing?
It can be, yeah. It can be really good. And actually, it was stressful because it didn't feel like anything was ever ripening. You know, when I'm going out there and tasting, going out in the vineyard to just tasting grapes to see how they're evolving and how they're coming along and how close we are to ripening, I felt like every time I went out there, we didn't make any progress. Like, the flavors weren't changing. The skins were still thick. I like the skins to thin out a little bit so that you can extract the stuff out of them easier. I'm waiting for certain fruit characters, certain fruit profiles in the grape. The acid, the tannin, like when I'm tasting for all these different things, when you go one week to the next, you expect these differences and you expect progress. And I would go week after week after week after week and wasn't tasting any difference. And so nothing's ever going to ripen, you know? It's just not happening. And then we finally kind of turned a corner where I started getting the character that I want, the flavors that I want in the grape. The skins finally started thinning out, and we started going, but this was mid-October, and we didn't finish picking until like November 6th, I think.
Amazing.
And yeah, normally we're done much earlier than that. Like 2015, as another example, I think we finished picking in mid-October. In 2018, we didn't start until mid-October. But what's nice about that cooler weather is it kind of preserves the fruit a little more. It doesn't cook it out when it's too hot. And so we have a lot of aromatics. You have a lot of depth and a lot of complexity. And so I think that cooler, longer season really benefited the wine, and just made this really beautiful, I think really stunning wine. And so I think that it's, like I said earlier, it's one of my favorite vintages that I've been a part of.
When I think about a long ripening, to me that means phenolics or flavors, right? Flavors have a long time to develop without all this sugar developing at the same time. And so, to me, just the way when you talk about it, it means a lot of flavor, balanced sugars, balanced acidity.
Right. Yeah.
For one that has length, depth, loads of flavor, layers of flavor, that each time I go back, I'm smelling something new beyond what's on this table.
Yeah.
That's like magic, Aaron.
Thank you.
A question from Facebook.
How much of winemaking is science versus instinct?
Want to take this one?
I'll take this one. This is from Sarah. No, well, but I do want you to answer, because sometimes I just make stuff up. But on top of science and instinct, I think fundamentally farming.
Yeah.
Farming. I mean, and geology. We think about all these things, not just farming. When do you pick? When he walks out into the vineyard and tastes, he's tasting grapes for ripeness and phenolics versus what's done inside. Can you speak to all that?
Yeah, so like what Sandra said, obviously farming is the most important in where you're farming. We can't make Plum Jack if we're not at Plum Jack on that site. But the balance of science and art is, it's very real. Like we use a lot of both. We use our own palettes. That's kind of the artistic part. It's our interpretation of this piece of land and the way that the Cabernet Sauvignon should be expressed on this piece of land. So I have a lot of there's a lot of different choices that I can make that will affect the wine from when I'm picking the grapes. I can pick much earlier and get a different style. I can pick much later and get a different style. I can use different oak. I can ferment the grapes differently, and a lot of what I'm doing is just based on my palate and the way that I think the wine should taste in the end. And so we use science to support that. We are out there tasting grapes, tasting wine, and we're making our blends. But the science is helpful in supporting that. We can test tannin. We can know how much tannin is in our wine or in the grapes before we pick. We can test the sugar levels. We can check for acid levels, and it's all really good information and it's really helpful. But ultimately, the decisions come down to the way the wine tastes and the way that I want the wine to taste, and making decisions to kind of steer it in the direction that I want it to go. And people talk about terroir a lot, which is the land, which is the fruit grown on the land. But what people don't often recognize is that people are a part of that. People are a part of terroir. People are a part of the expression of wine, and that's the farmers, that's the grape growers, that's all the people that are involved. Winemakers from beginning to end. It's a long process from bud break, when the vines wake up, and to when we bottle the wine, to when you get the wine on your table. It's 3, 4, 5 years, and so there's a lot of influence in there. But yeah,
there's a lot of pressure too. Do you feel a lot of pressure for? I mean, how big's your staff? like 20, 30 people maybe, Jack?
Yeah. There's three of us. So yeah, there's myself, our assistant winemaker Courtney, and then Josh in the cellar. And it's the three of us that make all the wine. During harvest, we get one or two interns to help us out. And yeah, I mean, there is a lot of pressure, but a lot of that pressure is from within. You know, it's we as winemakers, especially when we're making wines like this, I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to make the best wine that we can make. You know, and so yeah, it can be challenging, but a lot of that is stuff that we put on ourselves.
What about all those people out there?
Well, I definitely want them to enjoy the wine, but I think what I like to do is I like to make the wine that I like. I like to make the Cabernet Sauvignon the way that I think it should be, like the interpretation that I think it should be, you know, and then I just have to hope that you like what I like. And so I think it's working out. I think you guys like what I like.
So far, so good.
Yeah.
We have another question, but I do want to address, a lot of times when I'm out in the market, I hear, oh, big Napa Cab. And I never feel that way when I drink your Cab. I don't think it's a big, tannic Napa Cab. It's got this levity. How does that happen?
Well, so a lot of that has to do with the place, and it's the structure of the wine, the tannin profile, and on top of that, the acid profile. I think that when you have those big, massive cabs, I think those are cabs that are, well, it can be a couple things. One can be just extraction, like during the fermentation, they just extracted a bunch of tannin. There's massively tannin wines, like chewy wines. Another could be that there's less acid, so there's less natural acidity in the wine, which gives it the perception of volume on the palate. But I don't like to do either of those things. I like to let just the wine be itself, and that's my interpretation, right? Letting the wine kind of be this, and that's it's got a lot of tannin, but it's really fine, well integrated tannin, and it's velvety, so you almost don't notice it. Yeah, it's just like silky velvety. You almost don't notice it. It just glides across the palate, but it's complete. Like you can feel the tannin from the beginning of the palate, mid palate, into the back of the palate, and then the finish. It's seamless, you know. And then on top of that, we have really good acid, the natural acidity, and that helps to, I think, make the wine feel less weighty on the palate. You know, so it's not hugely mouth-filling. You know, it's just, I think it's just right. It's what I like. Yeah.
So balanced. It's really balanced. And then people often ask me too, how long will these wines age? And I always say, if it's balanced to begin with, it'll be balanced to end with. And that acidity is almost like squeezing a lemon over an apple to keep it from going brown. I think that acidity really props up your fruit for the long haul. And I've had 10, 15-year-old Plum Jack Cab that is delicious. Oh, I have a question.
This one's for you, Sandra. How has Costco affected your sales?
It hasn't. You know, unfortunately, we don't make enough wine to have had the ability to expand our distribution to Costco. So I understand that they do a wonderful job with Bordeaux and many of our neighbors here in the Napa Valley. We just don't have quite enough yet to sell to them. And unless Aaron makes some more for us.
Yeah, we just need to buy a little more land.
Another question?
What's a typical day in the life of a winemaker?
Well, part of the fun is that every day is a little different, especially seasonally. You know, during harvest, it's manic. You know, where you're up with the sun or before the sun, so you get to the vineyards when the sun is rising and go taste fruit. Get to the vineyard and try to get there before the rest of the team and start getting things set up. But oftentimes, if I have a lot of vineyards to go through, you know, I rely on them to take care of everything, and they do a great job of that. But some days in the cellar, we'll be crushing fruit during harvest, doing a lot of pump overs to make the wine. And you know, we can be there till 10 at night, and so those are really long, restless days. We're not getting much sleep, and we're on our feet for 16 hours a day.
What was the one you wore pedometer?
Oh, just on my phone, yeah. I mean, inside the winery, and our winery is an old little barn from 1800s, and just inside the winery, I can do 8 miles in a day, and that's just walking in circles basically, and then more mileage out in the vineyards too. But yeah, it can be frantic during harvest, but it's exciting during harvest. Like you're running on adrenaline, and that's when you're really making the wine. All the most important decisions that you're making are during that time. Probably when you shouldn't be, because you haven't slept. And, you're probably not thinking clearly, but that's the only time you get to do that.
That's the time you're actually making wine.
That's
you're a
when you're making
winemaker
wine.
at that moment. That's that's when you get to do what you do.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a short period, and the rest of the time we are aging the wine, we're elevating the wine, we're making the wine better. But the making the wine happened, in August, September, October, November, and the rest of the year you're just elevating it, aging it, blending it. And so the rest of the year can be quite different too, though, because we have bottling season and we're doing a lot of planning, a lot of preparation. We're bottling the wines. Also during that time, we might be doing some blending trials. So we're working on the Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon, for example. We'll be tasting a lot of different blend trials. So we have a lot of different blocks on the estate. There's different pieces of the estate. We'll try them in different proportions. We also have a little Petit Verdot and Malbec. We might try those in little proportions and taste a lot of blind tastings and try to find the best blends that we can. Then we make those blends. So we'll spend days where we're actually pulling wine out of barrels, putting it in tanks, putting it back in barrels, and allowing it to age together. And so it changes a lot, really, from August to June. We're pretty busy. July is really the only time for us that we have a break.
So when you say you're making the blends, talk to me about that process. Are you taking a little bit of this and a little bit of that and trying it and
so
tweaking it?
I'll use the Reserve as an example because it's the easiest to give a good idea of what we're doing. So on the estate we have different clones of Cabernet. We have some Petit Verdot, we have some Malbec. We have the different parts of the vineyard, the east and the west, and they all have different character. And so we ferment them separately. And then early on, just a few months after fermentation, and they're in barrel for a little bit, and we can start tasting what the character is going to be. We'll taste all of those different blocks independently and kind of get an idea of what the strongest, best blocks are. Like what could make up the Reserve. And then we'll start there. With the Cabernet only. We'll keep the Petit Verdot and Malbec aside for now. And then we'll take those best blocks and we'll make some blends. Like let's try 50% and 50% of these two, or 30-33, 33-33, or 90-10, or everywhere in between, And it takes time. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of tasting. And then we kind of narrow it down to these are the best options, and we'll do a lot of blind tastings, and we'll pick one and pull the trigger.
A lot of pressure.
Yeah, it's an important part of the process for sure. Because once you do the blend, you can't undo the blend. Right? So it's what's done is done. So you want to make sure that you are making the right decisions. So we taste quite a bit.
How do they teach you that in winemaker school? Like, how do you train for that?
I feel like you get more of that training on the job. You learn a lot of sensory stuff in winemaking school. You do a lot of stuff like this where you're tasting different components of wine. Blackberries, because there could be blackberry flavors, smells in cab, blueberries, coffee, and you taste those in smell them in black glasses, so that you just learn those smells and you can figure out how to attribute that to wines, and you learn how to tease that out of the glass.
I really encourage you to try this at home. Obviously, this wine doesn't have any blackberry in it, but if you take a bite of blackberry and smell blackberry and then smell the wine, it really isolates that flavor and smell, and you never forget it. And it's neat to have that experience.
Yeah, so I lost my train of thought. Where were we talking about?
I interrupted you, but we have a question.
Oh, okay.
Have you had a had to change any winery or property aspects in preparation for future potential fires?
Well, we haven't changed. There's not a lot we can do besides protecting the wineries. So that's basically making a space around the winery, a defensible space around the wineries. So especially up at Cade on Hell Mountain, we have to clear away a lot of brush and debris that is in the forests around the winery, and so that's just important for the protection of the winery.
Can I brag on you?
Sure.
I may have told this story before, but in 17, when the fires were kind of raging around the time of harvest, we lost electricity at Plumpjack.
It was during harvest,
Yeah.
in October.
We lost electricity at Plumpjack, and we needed a generator. We didn't have a generator because we have not faced these kind of problems before. And Aaron, our team of 3, our leader of our team of 3 at Plumpjack in the cellar, made 72 phone calls to get a generator. I think about that all the time, Aaron. How many people would have stopped after 10 calls, or 22 calls, 53 calls? How many people would have given up? And the fact that you made 73 phone calls to get a generator and save that vintage, that's the stuff that doesn't wind up on the tech sheet. That's the difference between good and great. That tenacity.
Thanks.
So we have a generator now.
So now we have a generator. No, I guess that was in addition to the winery. So we have generators now to make sure we have power. And losing power has been more common just because of the power safety, shutoffs. So we're trying to prevent fires. PG&E's trying to prevent fires by shutting off power kind of proactively when we have these windstorms. And these windstorms are becoming more frequent and more intense. And so it's been a challenge that we've been facing. And that's been something we've been facing more frequently for sure, is these extreme weather events. And that's kind of been the challenge with climate change here locally. And I know it's different everywhere. Everyone has their own unique challenges. But here locally, it's been extreme heat and dry winds, which is what's fueling the fire. So that's been our challenge, but that's also resulted in a lot of power shutoffs. So having these generators has been really useful because we can keep working through these power shutoffs.
It's crucial. But the good news is we released 2018, which was not only a great vintage, but was also an abundant vintage. So you should be able to find it out there for a little bit at least.
Yeah.
And it's not, can you describe it for us? I mean, besides
this stuff.
What do you think of it, Aaron?
Like I said, I love this wine. It's one of my favorites. I just love the intensity of the wine, intensity of the aromatics, especially. It does have a lot of this stuff in the wine. These aromatics, the blackberry and blueberry and the raspberry and cherry, which is all pretty typical. The fruit profile that we get from our estate. I think vintage to vintage, we typically have those characteristics. It's just that the intensity of one versus the other may change from vintage to vintage. They're all still there. 1 year, blackberry or blueberry might be like a dominant character. Another year it might be kind of an underlying, more subtle character in the wine. We always have a little bit of sage and mint. It's this almost like iron filings kind of character that we get in our wine. And that's definitely present here too. And that's actually right now one of the dominant characters that I'm smelling is some of that sage. And so I'm getting really good fruit, really good sage, and then that nice spice on the nose that you were talking about from the oak. I'm not getting as much of the coffee right now, a little more of the vanilla and spice. And that's the fun thing about wine is it evolves and it changes. It changes day to day almost, it seems. It's not like you have to wait a year for the wine to change. You can try the same wine, probably the same day in 2 different bottles and have a different experience.
One of the problems is it really goes with anything. But what would you pair it with, Aaron?
Well, I think the natural pairing that everybody likes to talk about with Cabernet Sauvignon is always steak. I don't think that's always the way you need to go, but if you want to do steak, I think this is like a New York strip kind of steak, kind of wine. Excuse me. Whereas Cade, I would say, would be more like your ribeye kind of This is, I think, your New York strip kind of wine, but I don't think you need to limit yourself to steak. I mean, it goes, like you said, it goes about everything. You can do a nice, like a double cut pork chop or something like that, or if you like fish. Earlier this year we tried this wine with blackened ahi. You know, it's some, you know, that pepper kind of brings out some of the darkness of the fish, and it goes really well with the Cabernet Sauvignon. I don't recommend it with spicy red snapper.
We're not calling anybody out there.
No, we did have that one pairing once for dinner, and I'm sure everyone likes different things. I'm sure there are people that loved it. It wasn't my personal favorite.
Lamb. I think lamb's a great pairing.
Yeah. Burgers, whatever.
Any other questions?
Do we have any more of these coming up?
Oh, well, what a good question. Actually, I'm not sure where we'll be sitting, but I will be interviewing Jeff Owens, our winemaker for Odette, because we've also released his 2018 Cabernet from right here in the Stag's Leap District. And what might be neat if you actually have both wines is to open them both. It'll be a Friday, this Friday, and try these two side by side. Not to see if one's better than the other, but really to discern the differences between what we do at Odette here in the Stag's Leap District versus Plumpjack in Oakville. And it's literally a 10-minute drive, and those wines could not, well, I guess they could be more different. One could be white, but they're quite different. And that's really, I mean, obviously winemaker influence, but we start with the same idea, and that is to let place shine through. And that's whether it's Chardonnay, Cabernet from Odette, Cabernet from Plumpjack, because you know, if you start with a good place and you start with good farming, really letting that shine. One time you said to me, Aaron, one of the hardest parts of my job is knowing when to step back and not do anything else. Does that still ring true for you?
Yeah, you don't want to interfere too much. You know, you want to let the vineyard shine through. You want to let the varietal, the grape shine through. And if you're too heavy-handed, then you know your influence is too great, and then you can change the wine too much. So you have to know when to step back. Yeah.
I think that's part of your humility too, as a human and a winemaker person. Cheers, friends.
Cheers.
Enjoy.